So Ari,
Hmm.
Bosch has introduced new firmware for the intrusion panel line.
Hmm.
Could you tell us why that's important for end users to have some type of plan for obtaining new firmware?
Sure. Well, the in the intrusion industry traditionally introduced new features when they introduced new panel models. Right? You would buy a panel, you would have it installed, and it would work more or less the same from the time it was installed to the time when it was replaced. So Bosch intrusion panels have the capability of having a firmware update. So Bosch regularly introduces new features and introduces them as a firmware update as opposed to as being part of a hardware update, so that you can have a panel, you can have that installed, you can have it running, you can update the firmware and add a new feature or new capability whenever they come out with a new firmware update. And Bosch is committed to introducing regular major firmware updates in addition to just minor bug fixes which they introduce as necessary.
So as an end user, do I buy this from Bosch? Do I buy it online? Do I call a dealer? How as an end user, is that going to help me get this installed?
So your end user, if you're an end user, you would have your installer download the firmware, implement the firmware upgrade onto your machines, and then take advantage of the firmware update. Take advantage of whatever new feature or new capability that the firmware update introduced. So what I would say, if you're an end user, if you have an organization where you have lots of alarm panels, you would want to work with your integrator to create some kind of what we're calling a firmware hygiene plan. You would want to have some kind of a schedule where a firmware update is rolled out to a certain segment of your panels. You'd want to have a rolling update schedule so that you have only a certain number of your panels having the latest firmware on there, unless there's some kind of reason, like if it was an urgent bug fix or an urgent cybersecurity issue or whatever. But you'd want to make sure that your new feature firmwares are rolled out to a segment of the organization. You'd also want to make sure that you have a schedule so that every panel gets upgraded on a regular basis, say annually, for example. Annually works best for most firmwares, I think.
So basically, I should sit down with my integrator, create a plan, and have this firmware upgraded on a yearly basis.
Absolutely. So you'd have some kind of plan where they would roll it out to the panels. They don't need to be on site to do the actual programming, but you do have to have some kind of a plan for testing. You never want to upgrade firmware to a device remotely and then not actually check to make sure everything's working. So you'd want to make sure that there's a site visit involved. You probably want to roll that into your regular maintenance plan, like where you check your keypad functions, you check your battery life, and so on. And then once you have that annual maintenance, you would want to include the firmware update as part of that annual maintenance.
So if I sit down with my integrator and come up with a yearly plan by having the firmware upgraded, what types of problems could I avoid by having this new firmware installed?
So we've added certain bug fixes, we've added certain known issues that we've solved, we've added integration with third-party products, we've added new end user features like language features. We've added things like adding more end user capabilities, that sort of thing. You would also avoid having, avoid not being able to address an evolving security situation. If you have a security system that was designed for a certain security situation or a certain time in the lifespan of your organization, you probably want to rethink that every so often, or revisit it at least every so often to make sure that your security system is still meeting your needs.
Well, that information has been most helpful, Ari. I appreciate your time talking about it today. If any of our customers or end users or dealers need any further information of support, please email us support@midchest.com. Thanks again, Ari.
Absolutely.